Hello, Divorce and Beyond family. I've got some exciting news because we have teamed up with Headspace to guide you toward better mental health. With Headspace's meditation, mindfulness tools, and mental health support, you're set for a journey to a happier, healthier you. And there's more because if you sign up through our exclusive link, you'll enjoy 2 weeks of Headspace membership for free. So don't miss out on this opportunity to embrace your well-being. You can check out the show notes for the link or just go to divorcebeyond.com/headspace-Susan, and you'll be able to start your path to peace and joy today. This is just one more way that we can support you on your journey to a better beyond.
Coming up on today's episode of the Divorce and Beyond podcast.
It's only once that relationship has hit its expiration date and people are looking to reconfigure into separate and apart homes that suddenly the law says, well, here is the standard on which you will do this. And the idea that people have that standard means that's the way they have to do it is slightly misinformed.
Hello, and welcome to the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host. As a top divorce attorney and family law mediator for 30 years, I know what you need to know to get through your divorce, and most importantly, how to move beyond it to thrive and transition to your new future. My experts and I are here to give you the insider view into the process, so listen in for the wisdom and expert information you need on your journey through divorce and beyond. Welcome to today's podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host, and today we are exploring a transformative approach to separation and divorce that might just change everything you thought you knew about the process. My special guest, Charmaine Panko, is a King's Counsel, collaborative lawyer, mediator, arbitrator, and trainer based in Saskatchewan, Canada. Charmaine is renowned for her passion for helping families navigate separation in a way that preserves relationships, protects children, and builds a foundation for the future. In this episode, Divorce Without the Drama, the Power of Custom Solutions for Families, Charmaine shares how curating your divorce agreement can empower you to take control, protect your legacy, and keep your family's unique needs at the heart of the process. Whether you are facing a high net worth divorce, managing complex family dynamics, or simply wanting to make decisions that align with your values, this conversation will leave you inspired and informed. So let's dive in. So Charmaine, I am so delighted to have you here with us today. This is an episode that I have really been looking forward to. Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure. I'm super excited as well.
You and I have known each other for a number of years now. In fact, I think you were the first person I ever met who lived in Saskatchewan.
The question is, have you met anyone since?
Really? I don't know that I have. And as I mentioned to you, I've been to Canada quite a bit in the past year. And it's been delightful, and I have some trips planned for next year, but hopefully soon to Saskatchewan. But one of the reasons why I've wanted to have you on is because, your firm, you have a firm that is focused on family issues and dealing with family issues. It's a family firm as well. Many members of your family work in the firm. And one of the things that I think really sets your firm apart is that when it comes to divorce, you are real proponents and experts at helping people curate their divorce settlement in a way that works for their family. And I think this idea of curating a settlement is a little different from what people think, right? Most people think, well, the law tells us what we have to do with our divorce and our stuff and our kids, and we just sort of have to stay within those boundaries and guidelines, and it will settle our divorce for us. And what you really do for people is take people, and let me just give some ideas, high net worth people who have, children with specific needs, or really any parents who want to be focused, very child focused on their divorce. A lot of gray divorce and legacy building families who have been in those situations where they're not just planning this divorce for their generation, but they know what happens in the divorce will impact future generations. You really work with these very complicated matters, but help these people get this settlement and this planned resolution that takes everyone forward into the beyond. So that's what we're talking about today. And I love it. And I love what you all do. So, how has this come about? How has your firm sort of become the go-to for this type of a resolution?
A person can look back at their entire history and see moments that influenced them. And you don't know at the time that you're being influenced in a certain way. But then when you're asked a question like this, you look back and you wonder to yourself, how did that influence me? And you notice that it's shown up in where you've landed. So Saskatchewan, for the listeners who don't know, is a prairie province in Canada. And I grew up in a small town in Saskatchewan, and my dad, who is going to be 99 years old here in March. He's a cowboy, and I grew up in that type of an environment where as a cowboy, you just have to make good, practical, common sense decisions. And I can look back at a lot of the things that my dad had said to us growing up that I know really made an impact on me, though I'm sure at the time I didn't appreciate it. And some of the processes that he implemented, I have a younger sister, and we would have these little arguments from time to time, and my dad would bring us to the kitchen table and say, all right, let's talk this through and figure out what's going to happen. And he would do it by allowing us to put our own opinions into the conversation to determine the outcome. Now, I didn't know there was such a thing as collaborative law or mediation, or that I'd be helping families reconfigure their family system in the future. But at that time, when my dad would say things like, all right, Joanne, that's my sister, Joanne, if this is going to be the rule going forward, for example, you're not going to go and take Charmaine's clothes without telling her, what will be the consequence if you do this? And my sister was very fussed about that. Well, what could be the consequence? I think that this wouldn't be fair, or that wouldn't be fair. And then finally, my dad says, but if you're not going to do it anyhow, what difference does it make what the consequence would be? And it were those little bits and pieces of empowerment and the recognition that as human beings, we really inherently have a right to self-determination. So fast forward to working with families. And I know that for the most part, when people decide to become spouses or have children together, nobody's sitting them down and saying, hey, here are the parameters around how you have to do this. It's only once that relationship has hit its expiration date and people are looking to reconfigure into separate and apart homes that suddenly the law says, well, here is the standard on which you will do this. And the idea that people have that standard means that's the way they have to do it is slightly misinformed. And what we talk about is here in Saskatchewan, we have, and if you look up Saskatchewan, you'll see we are flat. So there are no even hills. And one of the jokes is that if your dog runs away, you can watch it run away for 3 days because it's just the horizon going forward for miles and miles and miles. And so, and our highways are very boring to drive and it's easy to fall asleep. So we have rumble strips on both sides. So when you're driving and if you're kind of dozing off, you hit the rumble strip, wakes you up, says, hey, you better get back onto the road. But the road itself is double lane. And so some people will drive on the right-hand side, some will drive on the left-hand side, and that is acceptable. And it's when you hit the rumble strips that it's a wake-up call to say, well, you could keep driving on those rumble strips, but if you veer further, you're going to end up in the ditch and maybe we have barbed wire fences, maybe you go through the fence and you hit a cow, and you're really going to have some problems. So when we work with families, and that's how we engage with the law, we say that somebody who was smart and looked at all of the research and what needed to be done in order to create some outcomes that are fair and equitable. I mean, we have fabulous legislation here in Saskatchewan. As an example of one, our Family Property Act, it's objective. It explicitly states that inherent in the spousal relationship is joint and equal contribution by both spouses, regardless of if that came as a result of earning income or taking care of children or managing the households. And because of that joint and equal contribution, there is an assumption that the parties are going to be entitled to an equal division of what was acquired during the spousal relationship. It's very beautiful when you think about it. And so the application of that for people who are in an emotionally escalated state because they are afraid, maybe they're hurt and they're angry, they look at that and they think, applying this to my situation is going to wreak havoc to everything we've acquired. It's going to destroy things and all of the negative messaging that people hear. And what we like to do is we like to reframe that for people and say, you know what, the legislation is there as your rumble strips. And if you're negotiating a plan that is a little outside of the legislation's expectations, then you have to have a reason for it. You've got to think about it. But there's a wide highway there. And how you actually accomplish that objective of sharing equally, subject to exemptions and equitable considerations, it's a wide highway. And we can consider what is important to you. So if you have children that you had always intended to send to university, you had a child who really always wanted to be a doctor, and you're like, we are going to let them just focus on their education and they don't have to worry about the money, and we have saved money for that purpose. And now you are separating. Doesn't mean you have to now just divide up that property and hope your child can, do well with plan B. You can come to a table and talk about what that goal was, that mutual goal and desire that you still have, and how we can make that happen while still
staying
those
within
parameters.
yeah.
Exactly.
I love, that's a wonderful analogy that you're using there of the double wide highway. It reminds me of driving through Texas as I was doing that. Talk about a flat, just ongoing, the vision of the dog or the cow running away for 3 days. I could see it there. But I love that analogy of, being able to basically drive anywhere on the road that you want to, but the rumble strips or the law is there to sort of, help you stay within bounds, but you've got a lot of roadway there to move with. And I think that that's important because you used some key words here that I want to point out for my listeners. You talked about self-determination. And I think that gets lost very often in the divorce process for people because they think that they have no control. And what you're really talking about in a curated agreement, in this ability to sit down and talk about what jointly the two of you still prioritize and want to effectuate, you're bringing back that self-determination.
Absolutely. And that is a huge, one of our core values. So we want to provide services to people that are excellent. We want to do it in a way that builds relationship, and we want to empower people. And there's sometimes a concern that people have around where there's been family violence and there's power imbalance, or even where it has happened just by function of the roles and responsibilities each spouse took during the course of the relationship. It's not uncommon for one person to be the one who's in charge of all of the banking and the
Sure.
financial decisions. And then the other person at the time of separation, they're suddenly thinking, oh my goodness, like I don't even know how to log into a bank account. And so the fear about coming to a negotiation table, whether that's in mediation or collaborative law, and feeling like, well, I don't have access to enough information, and how could I exercise my right to self-determination and be empowered in that way when I'm at such a disadvantage? And this is another common myth, and that if you come into an interest-based kind of process with somebody who is trained and will utilize a process that's customized to your needs, what they're going to do is they're going to take the time to understand that you're vulnerable and find out what is needed to help you exercise your right to self-determination. So there's not an assumption that everybody's coming to the table with equal bargaining power. There's the assumption that each of you are going to have some unique needs, and we're going to customize the process for you. It might mean that we're going to bring on a financial neutral that's going to find out, well, what questions do you have? What supporting documents are needed to be looked at, and not just to be looked at, but to be explained to you, and to have it explained to you so that you can understand what would be the implication of dividing things in a certain way right now, but also what will it look like 5, 10, 15 years from now. For people that are going through a gray divorce, some families that have been together for maybe 40 or more years,
Yeah.
and they've always been thinking about that next step. What will retirement look like? Well, suddenly the terror of, well, not only am I not going to be able to have that retirement I had hoped for, but maybe I'm going to have to go back to work, or what are all of the implications? Well, before we do anything, why don't we take a look at it?
It's so important, I think, what you're saying, Charmaine, about the self-determination, about the ability for people to come to the table not necessarily ready to make those final decisions about how this is all going to work out, that, becoming empowered through the process, learning what they need to know. Each person probably has very different needs on what they might require in order to get to the place where they're ready to start making those decisions. But no one's expecting people to come to that table day one ready to go with this. And, it's striking a chord for me, because we were talking before we started taping about gray divorce, which is, so becoming much more common these days. And I think that's where you really do often see, these 30, 40-year relationships where one party has always been in charge of like one aspect of the family and what's happening, and the other one is in charge of other aspects. Usually there's a dichotomy of financial input of the partners. And that brings a lot of fear when it comes time then, especially on the part of the spouse who hasn't done the finances. So tell us more about that, and maybe specifically, because I know you do a lot of gray divorce.
For families that are going through this for the first time, and if you have been together for 30 or 40 years, chances are it's the first time. So you don't know how it's going to work. You don't know even what the process looks like. What your reference point is are the stories that you've heard through the years, or what you've seen on TV. And typically what is entertaining for people to talk about or to put into a movie are the train wrecks. So your only point of reference is, oh my goodness, everything that I have invested my entire life into is now going to be blown up. And the fears connected to not just the loss of the dream about what retirement might look like, but also the fears connected to what will the impact be on our children, our adult children, on the next generation that's going to come. What kind of legacy are we able to leave now that we're going to, wreck everything that we built up? And so inviting people into a process like mediation or collaborative law, even, will represent people using a model we call settlement advocacy. So even if the other spouse isn't willing to come and to negotiate, we utilize the same principles to help support our client to be able to get the information that they need so they can make the good choices that will then support them going forward to achieve the goal. Now, not only do you have a situation where people are concerned about the impact their separation will have, not on just their own dreams, but the dreams that they have for their adult children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, the generations to come. Because often, here in Saskatchewan, we have a lot of generational wealth and family farms that have been in the family for maybe 100 years. And the shame that people can feel about thinking, oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to pass that forward when it was given to us in the fashion that it was. So helping people to get the information they need to be able to understand all their options, I think, is critical to helping people exercise their right to self-determination. And whether that is by having great advice from an excellent settlement counsel, or it's working together with other counsel and other supporting professionals like a financial neutral. A financial neutral can come in and help on a file to identify, well, what supporting documents do we need when maybe one spouse has never, ever even seen a bank statement? They don't understand the corporate structure, or they don't understand that there are going to be tax implications. They are just accustomed to a certain lifestyle. And that doesn't mean it was necessarily a lifestyle that was really glamorous, or that it was, like a lot of the families, they were just very smart with and conservative in their spending too, but it's the unknown. So being able to bring in somebody that is going to support the information gathering, the information understanding, and then the projections that says, what will the impact be now? And what will the impact be in the future? And how can we structure this to ensure, or at least help you get as much of your dreams and goals still accomplished? And it doesn't have to be, well, we're just going to cut it in the middle and good luck with your share.
We're going to take a quick break, but before we dive back in, I want to remind you that there's even more valuable insights coming up in the second half of this episode. Charmaine and I are going to discuss the impact of divorce on children, how to protect their well-being through using curated agreements, and some powerful strategies for maintaining privacy and legacy in high-stakes divorces. You don't want to miss it. And now, a quick word from our sponsor, YumiU.
Your family isn't breaking. Your family is reconfiguring. It is taking its system and it's changing it into a new fashion. So let's figure out, what does it need? What are the individual components, or the people, the children, the parents, what are they going to need? And then utilize our common sense within those rumble strips of the legal parameters to customize what your plan is going forward.
Now, let's take a little minute to talk about something special. If you follow me on Instagram, you all know how much I love my evil eye pendant. I love I have my bracelet. I have the pendant that goes around my neck. I wear evil eyes all the time. And so many of you have reached out asking where I got them. I'm thrilled to share with you all, drum roll please, that my favorite jewelry source, YumiU Jewelry, is now a sponsor of Divorce and Beyond. For me, YumiU Jewelry is more than just jewelry. The symbols are symbols of strength, individuality, and empowerment. And they handcraft each piece with love and care. And so they are designed to help women stand out and embrace our unique personalities. So whether it's an evil eye like I have chosen for protection, a hamsa for faith, or any other meaningful symbol, their pieces offer beauty and inspiration even during these tough times like divorce. So here's the best part. YumiU is giving my listeners an exclusive discount if you use the code BEYOND, that's BEYOND, all caps, at checkout, you'll get 20% off your order. 20%. So if you're looking for a meaningful piece to keep you inspired or to protect you during this difficult time, visit divorcebeyond.com/YumiYu. That's YUMIYU. And treat yourself or treat someone you love to something special. You deserve it. Now, let's get back to the second half of the show. So important what you say there about the understanding of what the implications are of the decisions, because here's what I've seen. Let me know if you think that this is true. When we get into a case where a client is 100% relying on the advice of either their attorney or their financial advisor, right? They professional says, here's what I think you should do. That's what a lot of people want to hear from us when we act in those roles. But they may follow that advice because they're paying for it. They trust you. That's good. But they're never as comfortable with those decisions as they are when someone has actually educated them and given them the power to understand why or why not certain things are what's best for them. And so that's the critical, and that's the empowerment, and that is the self-determination piece. And it's so hard for people to grasp sometimes, but you can pay for the best advice in the world. But if all you're doing is following someone else's advice, there's always a niggle of uncertainty underneath the decision.
100%. And not only will you potentially suffer from, buyer or seller remorse because you're like, oh, was that the best? Because you didn't have the input into considering the pros and cons of the different options, but also what might you have left on the table that the person who gave you advice didn't even know was important to you, because those people, your lawyers or your financial advisors, when they're advising just for you, they are looking at that substantive outcome and they're measuring it against those rumble strips of what the legislation says, how the law would apply if it was a third party decision maker saying this is what shall happen. They are not going to be able to consider what's important to you from a psychological and emotional perspective. What's important to you procedurally, what's important to you about what your children will say about the experience that they had as you went through this transition. And if you can help people put their mind there to that future that has them looking back on this experience, and they're able to see, I conducted myself in a certain way that's congruent and aligned with my values. And I made sure that I took the time, got the information that I needed, and was, as you say, educated about what that information means to get this end result that I can have peace of mind about.
Yeah. And that is a whole different level. That's Absolutely. The curated divorce, right? That is the knock the cookie cutter. And I think for people, I love how you've explained it, because I think for people, it's very hard to understand this distinction. And for many people who are overwhelmed by the whole process, by the emotions, they're living in a place of fear. It can feel like a lot to be like, what do you mean? Right. I also have to learn a bunch of stuff here in this. But you've picked on that really key and important part, because nobody else but you knows the intangibles that come into it. And we've been talking about gray divorce and legacy building, but let's talk about, I think this is so common. Anybody who's a parent going through divorce, the number one thing we know they Google is, how do I keep divorce from negatively impacting my children, right? That's like, in some variation of that is the number one Google search for all parents going through divorce. How does this curation, this ability to be educated, to make those informed and self-determined choices, how does that curated divorce benefit their
regardless
children?
Of the age or stage of development of the child? So whether you're talking about a minor child or an adult child, within the family system, they have a place, and they have a place and a role that now is changing for them and what their relationship is like with each parent and with each other is going to be impacted by this change. And that's the starting point. We must be honest about that. It's going to impact it, but that doesn't mean it's going to impact it negatively if we take the time to understand the individual needs of the children as well. And you'll hear a lot in the law about how children have a voice but not a choice, and the parents have to be the ones to make the decision. That's correct. You must not abdicate your responsibility as a parent. You must not put your children in the middle and say to them, oh, how should this happen? But if you have a child, it is very important that you understand what their priorities are going forward. What are some of the fears that they might have? And if you have a sibling group, to recognize that within that sibling group, each child is going to have their own individual perspectives and needs and concerns. So something that's a bit unique, I think, about myself is I have 11 children. So I have 11 children.
Yes. That's a little
they
unique.
span
Charmaine.
over the course of 20 years. And I know people are often like, are they all yours? And I'm like, yes. And so there were no multiples and they have the same dad, all of those standard questions. But my youngest daughter, her and I were shopping one day. And children, it's just so interesting, the things that they pick up on and that they ruminate over. And regardless of what, how careful we think we are that we're protecting them from information that might, cause them some alarm. So we're just shopping, and out of the blue, she asks me a question. She says, hey, Mom, when people separate, when moms and dads divorce, and there's more than two children, where do the other children go? And I said, well, tell me a little more about your question. And at the heart of the question.
Oh, so that's such a mediator response. Very well done.
At the heart of it was this little girl's first. So first of all, she's paying attention. She understands the work that we do. You mentioned earlier, we're a family firm. So she has older siblings that work here with me. And, so she's paying attention to things. There's my ears fall out here. She's paying attention to things. And it's happening in her head. And so even for somebody whose family isn't going through this, they think about it. And she had thought, well, if you have two children, one child would go with mom, one child would go with dad. And then the problem, she has 10 siblings. Well, where the heck is everybody else going to go? And you and I and the listeners know that's not the way that it works. But a child, they don't know that. And so finding a way to incorporate into your separation process an understanding of what's happening for your children and what are some of the needs that they might have as you move forward. The transitioning between two homes, for many children, they're able to do that very well because we know, children are resilient and they, can manage. For some children, that creates a tremendous amount of anxiety. And yet we also know they must, right. It's important for them to have a relationship with both parents. So how could we perhaps come and problem solve that to say, well, what's really going to be best for Johnny? And maybe Sally, it's not going to bother her. So instead of treating them like they're just one little unit that we say, well, they're going to go back and forth week on, week off, maybe we're going to say, well, Johnny, because of his unique needs and circumstances, maybe he's not going to go back and forth because it increases his anxiety. Also, when it comes to medical things. So I have a granddaughter who has cystic fibrosis, and she has to go through a regimen every day that's involving medicine and treatment and the way that she eats. There are lots of things. And I sometimes think about what would happen if her parents needed to separate into separate homes, and how best would Baylor's needs be met? Is it going to be that, well, every week we've got to take all of the stuff, all the equipment, all the medicine and everything, and take it over to one house and then bring it back? Or do we buy double of everything and add some additional financial stress? Or are there some other things that we could consider? The curating of and the individualized planning. I kind of think it's almost like you're leaving a spousal relationship, which is one kind of joint venture. And now you're going into a new joint venture that says, well, you're co-parenting. And even if your children are adults, I mean, you're still their parents, and how they're experiencing this is still
Yeah.
going to impact them. So if you, in any other context, if you were building a house, if you were opening a grocery store, you would sit down and you would think about what are all of the needs in order to make this joint venture successful. So let's do that when your family isn't breaking. Your family is reconfiguring. It is taking its system and it's changing it into a new fashion. So let's figure out, what does it need? What are the individual components, or the people, the children, the parents, what are they going to need? And then utilize our common sense within those rumble strips of the legal parameters to customize what your plan is going forward.
I'm sitting here and I'm thinking there's such synchronicity in this world, just as a little bit of an aside for listeners. For those who are usual listeners, last week we had on Trina Knudsen, and she was talking about the fact that co-parenting relationship is, you are in the business of raising your children. It is a business relationship as you go forward, much as Charmaine just said. And I want listeners to know, next week on the show, we're going to be having one of Charmaine's and my colleagues, Robin Sachs, on, who is an attorney and an LMFT. And she's going to be talking about bringing the voice of children into the divorce process and how that might be done safely and appropriately and why it's important. So just, the synchronicity of how all this comes together and really goes to the heart of what you're talking about. And for those who are listening, no divorce is the same. And that is something, 35 years at it myself. I know you've been a divorce practitioner supporting, people for, I won't venture a guess, but I think I've been doing it a little bit. I know I'm a little older, but either way, we've been at this a long time. We've seen, and there's never a single solitary divorce that's cookie cutter, but it's when people embrace the curation or the ability to be creative and to come at this as, let's make it the best it can be as I like your term, reconfigure our family for the benefit of our children, for the benefit of our legacy. I know another aspect you talked about was people, high net worth families. You were talking about the legacy, but high net worth families also face consequences of divorce where privacy and reputation can be really impactful, not because they're concerned so much about their privacy, perhaps, but maybe their family's privacy or the business's privacy or reputation, right? Because that then has a domino effect for the legacy going forward or the impact on the children going forward. Let's talk about that a little bit and why curation's so important.
Oh, and I'm so glad that you've brought this up, because I think a lot of people don't actually understand. Here in Saskatchewan and in Canada, we have an open court principle, and that means that anything that a judge is hearing, the public can sit in on. So if you are going to the court and you are putting evidence before a judge, for a judge to tell you how to divide up your property, how to parent your children, and what you're going to do with your finances, anybody can sit in that room and hear that evidence being led, and then the judge makes a decision and it gets published online. And once something's online, it's always online. Now, certainly, what are the odds that somebody's just going to type in your name and then find your case? Well, maybe it's a slim, chance, but when it happens, the impact is tremendous. So I have the privilege of being a sessional lecturer at our College of Law, the University of Saskatchewan. I work with law students and I teach them about this way of helping families as they're going through these life changes. And one of the things that I do is I say to the students, listen, here's the link where all of the cases are published. Why don't you hop on that link and, just take a look around? And one evening, I had a student come to me afterwards who said, "Hey, listen, I'm sorry, I maybe was a little checked out for the balance of the class." He said, "Because I knew that my grandparents had gone through a divorce, and I typed in their name, and all of a sudden, the student was reading about how the grandmother had been being accused of having had an affair, and how one of the family members, there were mental health issues, and and not to mention the fact that it's published about what the net worth is and where it is and if they've had financial troubles. So you just don't know when you're putting that information into an open court where and who will ultimately see that and how that could impact not just your reputation and legacy, but even a family member who maybe didn't know that they'll never be able to unsee those
No. And
words.
well, and it's so, I want to say to those who are listening, you talked about Canada has this sort of open court, open testimony. So does the US. So if you're in the US and you're listening to this,
Okay.
in general,
Mhm.
unless for some very special reason you are able to close a courtroom, which
Right.
let me tell you has to be special, not because you think you're special, but they're you, right? Because everybody thinks they're special. It's open record, and it's the same thing, right? You don't want your children reading it. But for, I've had a number of clients who are high profile, celebrities or very high net worth families. And you
Right.
said, well, what are the odds someone's going to go Google this? If you are high net worth, if you are high profile, if you're a celebrity, the chances are TMZ is Googling every single day to find out. So for those families, a curated divorce approach, because if you are a family, or if you are someone who has a family business or a business, any business that's very successful, and now you're going through a divorce, the impact of what is said about you, maybe the CEO or the founder of the business, being accused of alcoholism or being a family abuser or whatever might be said in that courtroom, can not only significantly impact that family and what happens in that courtroom, but the business can be affected by that. And then all the employees who work for that business might have their livelihoods affected. The children and the legacy that you're set forward for that family, the support for the family as it goes forward might be affected if the business is affected. It can have such a domino effect, as I alluded to. So that ability to keep things private for everyone's benefit is also something to be taken into consideration. I've had people, and I'm sure you've heard this before, maybe it's a little different with the tax system in Canada. In the US, I often have people who will come to me and say, I'm going to report him or her to the IRS because I know they've been hiding income on our tax returns for years because they have a cash. Well, first off, not that bright, because you probably are a co-signer on those income tax returns. But the second aspect might be, if that person then is prosecuted for, whatever that might be, what happens to the income that helps support your family going forward? Right? So you may get a little satisfaction in the short term, but in the long term, it might be a very bad idea for a lot of reasons.
And part of curating your separation is the timing, because when are you most likely to do something that's not in your best interest like that? It's when you are emotionally escalated, because the brain science tells us your amygdala is hijacked and is going to make decisions when it is not designed to be the part of your brain that makes decisions. And then after you've made these very bad decisions in the future, you look back with regret. So curating your separation, it speaks to not just all of the options for property division, not just about how might you parent in the best interests of your children, but also when should you do what? Sometimes you get a funny phone call where somebody says, "Hey, I'm calling because I need an expedited divorce." You say, "Okay, well, tell me more about what that means." And they'll be like, "Yes, well, yesterday I opened the Facebook and I saw that my husband's been, corresponding with somebody inappropriately." So, it's like, well, I don't think the day after you get that kind of information is the day to make those big decisions. So we like to help people understand that this is actually a 1 year process of sorting things out. And then it's at least another year afterwards of working through getting used to this new configuration. Now, can some people move through it more
Yep.
quickly? Absolutely, because for some people, by the time they're coming here, they actually sort of separated in their own minds, maybe even years ago. And it was only just now that they're like, okay, let's move forward. Does it take some people longer to, have to work through because their situation is more complex? Absolutely. But in general, you need a year in order to be able to be in an emotionally stable place to have made good decisions. And you're not going to sit around and wait for that year and not deal with aspects of your property, like who's living in the home or if it's
Right.
going to be sold or, who's taking the children to hockey. You're going to do those things, but you're going to do them in ways that help get you from one meeting to the next meeting as you start to lay the foundation, the groundwork for this joint venture that's going to go on for many years beyond. And I sometimes think about why it is that I feel so passionate about this. And as I said before, there's all sorts of things a person can look back on, but there's one story in particular that I know is really at the core of why it's important to me that we work this way. And it's connected to one of my daughters when she was graduating. Here in our city, we have the school that she went to. It's a large school for our standards, anyhow. And the facility for graduation could only hold so many people. So each of the graduates were told that they could invite 2 people to the graduation. And my daughter had a friend whose parents were going through separation, and it was a very high conflict situation, or at least that's how the daughter was experiencing it. And it was so bad for her that she couldn't imagine both of her parents being in the same room, even a large room. And she couldn't imagine inviting one parent and not the other. So she chose to not invite either parent. And so that significant milestone of her life, that opportunity for a memory that you could always look back on with joy, is now something very different. And it didn't have to be like that. So putting our minds to the what, the when, the how in a way that's customized for the family preserves those opportunities to make them be the best that they could be. It's not going to be perfect. Nothing's perfect. If things could be perfect, you probably wouldn't be separating in the first place. But how can we work together as professionals to support families and help give them the education that's needed for them to know there are some rumble strips for us to be aware of, but there's a lot of flexibility in between.
I love that you tell that story. Thank you for sharing that story, because I think that more than anything else, maybe that we've said in this entire episode, will help people to understand why curating your divorce agreement, taking that time to become educated so that you can exert your self-determination and make the best decisions for restructuring your family and for those children. That's such a sad story. And I'm so sorry for that. Yeah, that young girl, but for the whole family right there, right? They all lost.
Absolutely,
they all lost right there. So flip of that, I do have to say, you said, who's going to take the kids to hockey? Quintessential Canada right there, everybody.
Yes,
I'm like,
indeed.
Your Canada came out. It's so funny. Here in the U.S., it might have been baseball practice or football. You're like, who's taking the kids to hockey? Like, that's the only place they're going.
Hockey?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Listen, we've had families who they are operating at such a financial deficit that that they need to cut expenses, and they will cut their grocery bill and their savings bill before they'll cut their expense line connected to hockey. So just to know, that is not just stereotypical Canadian, but it is real Canadian.
It is in the blood. And I do have to say, I was in the on the East Coast for a long time, and we had a home in in Vermont, which Stowe, Vermont has a big hockey academy where people actually send their children year round for school and hockey and all that. So it's also somewhat ingrained in certain aspects. And I can tell you the cost of travel hockey for children is something I know more about, having done divorces in that area for so long. I cannot believe what that costs for families.
Oh, it's wild.
Well, and another reason why curating your divorce might be something that is a good idea. But I am so glad that we got to talk about this and bring your approach, the common sense lawyer approach. Yeah. That is your law firm. You've mentioned common sense several times, and how your dad brought that into the mix. I love that story. I don't think I knew that about you and your family, but I'm glad that we've been able to talk about it. I want to say for my listeners, Charmaine has mentioned she's in Canada. We're going to give all of her information. If you're in Canada, want to curate your divorce, obviously reach out to Charmaine and her firm. If you're in the US, check out our episodes with Beth McCormick. She's a colleague and friend here in Chicago. Beth for the US would be very similar, and her approach to divorce would be very similar to Charmaine's and her firm's approach for Canada. But so let's do that. Charmaine, how can people get in touch with you? How can they follow up if they need to or want to explore curating their divorce?
Absolutely. We would love to hear from you. Our website is commonsenselawyer.com. I'm on TikTok. My handle's at Common Sense Lawyer. I'm always happy to respond to inquiries. Our emails are published. I'm Panko at commonsenselawyer.com, and our phone number, area code 306-975-7151. We are always happy to talk to somebody, send them the information that they might need that helps them understand different process options and make some decisions about how they want to move forward.
And I highly recommend you reach out. As always, I will have all of Charmaine's information and the firm's information in the show notes. So go there if you want to follow up. But Charmaine, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful conversation, and I've just really enjoyed being able to get to spend some time with you. I always do. And I'm just delighted that you were able to share your insights with my listeners. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
As we wrap up today's episode, let's highlight 3 golden nuggets from my conversation with Charmaine. So first golden nugget, self-determination is key. Divorce doesn't have to mean losing control. With the right process and support, you can make informed decisions that align with your family's unique values and goals. Golden nugget number 2, curating your agreement matters. A one-size-fits-all divorce isn't the only option. Customizing your agreement can help preserve relationships, protect your children, and safeguard your legacy. And golden nugget number 3, timing and emotional readiness are critical. Rushed decisions made in an emotionally heightened state can lead to regret. Taking the time to gather information, understand the implications, and approach the process thoughtfully makes all the difference. I hope these golden nuggets inspire you to think differently about divorce and what's possible when you prioritize what truly matters. Thanks for joining us today, and be sure to tune in next week for more insights and strategies to help you move to your beautiful beyond. Thank you for joining me today on the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I hope you found some information and inspiration to help you on this journey. Please join me every Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a new episode. And if you like the show, please take the time to subscribe and leave me a 5-star review on iTunes. You can also find more information on the website at divorceandbeyondpod.com, where you'll find links to the YouTube channel, transcripts of the episodes, and other bonus content. So I'll see you next week to help you move through your divorce and beyond.